The following is a segment from Session 10 of the Honestly Better Mental Fitness Show. If you would like a list of all the segments and the full sessions, please visit honestlybetterfitness.com/list. That's honestlybetterfitness.com/list.
Welcome to LNH Industrial, Honestly Better Mental Fitness. I found mental fitness a few years ago, and it changed my life. It's changed my family's life. And now we're bringing it to all of LNH Industrial to put it out to the rest of the world. Thank you for joining us.
This is number one because it's literally number one. Like, this is probably the number one thing that gets people. It's the inability to solve conflict and the accumulated small daily conflicts that don't get resolved, that in the end, a couple that used to love each other now hates each other, now can't stand each other, now doesn't want to be in the same room with each other. Or their world gets so small because there's so many hot button topics that they can't discuss, that they're limited to talking about the weather, saying hello, did you make the coffee yet? And then moving on, because if it gets deeper than that, it gets explosive. And then your relationship shrinks. It starts to become less and less. And then there's not enough good. And there's a deep thing of the other one, the other big indicator is the ratio of positive to negative experiences. That's it. It's pretty simple. Is your relationship a net gain or a net loss? Are there more positive experiences than negative experiences, or are there more negative experiences than positive experiences? And that will dictate where your relationship ends up at. Let's move on. Know yourself, know your partner. Understanding others requires recognizing their unique desires and needs rather than assuming they think like us. I know there's been a big drive at LNH to unique ability, right? Understanding each other's unique ability in there. And there's been a lot of tests in there. I think it's awesome and it's credible what you're doing in there in the company and how the teams are working with each other to understanding the strengths and weaknesses. And I think this whole like roadmap is like the roadmap to how to love this person, right? And my question might be like, how well do you really know your partner, or how much are you assuming that they are like you? It reminds me of like when a person, a kid first leaves home, and there's all these things that they thought was normal. They're like, oh, you guys didn't eat dinner together every night, or the reverse, like, you guys ate dinner together, like whatever it is, or you didn't get yelled and screamed at every day, or your mom cooked you breakfast, really? Like, I whatever it is, like whatever your experience is, you just accept that because you don't know anything else. And I think when we move into relationships, it's similar. Like, we don't know how other people are different from us until we are faced with it. And then when we're faced with it, a lot of, do we view it as like, oh, that's interesting, and how do I try to put myself in this other person's shoes, or do we do it as, they're wrong? I think the key thing to look at this is all of these things are on a scale. It's like none of them are good, none of them are bad. It's which is the right for the moment in here. So, like, is it better to be an introvert or an extrovert? Well, it's just different, right? It's just how you're made, Or is it better to be a person that's not afraid to take risks and like is this quick start person that has all these new ideas and is innovating? Or is it better to be the person that I'm not really going to take a risk? We're not going to change what's working. We're going to maintain. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep this thing going. And there's I think the core thing in here is to recognizing there's different personalities, there's different unique desires and needs. And one thing that sticks out when I'm working with couples a lot is when I'm working with them individually, often the perspective is I'm giving all of this stuff and I don't receive anything. And I'm like, oh, wow. So you must have a terrible partner. I'd be an idiot if I stopped that. But that's sort of like, okay, yeah, right. Like, and then you hear the other side and they're like, oh, no, you're the one doing all the giving and not receiving anything. And it's like, how are both these people doing all the giving, but neither one is receiving in here? And it goes something like this, right? Like, man, I showed you I loved you by mowing the lawn and changing your oil and doing all this, like, and the other person was like, well, I showed you love. I wrote you a letter and I send you text all day long. And it's like, and I think you're probably getting what's going on here. Each is loving the other in the way that they want to be loved, not the way that their partner wants to be loved. And so, like, I want somebody to mow my lawn for me and to take the burden of this thing. And so that's what I'm doing for my partner. But that's not the way my partner receives love. My partner receives love by signs of affection or by warmth and kindness or by frequent check-ins through the day. And so it's deeply understanding. And it is like building this roadmap or this love map to how do you love your other partner in a way that they receive love, right? What are their deep desires? What are the things that you can do for them in there? How well do you know your partner? And also, I would flip this on, how well do you know yourself? And how well do you advocate for yourself? Do you know how you want to be loved? And have you communicated that? Oh, well, I assumed she'd know or I would assume that he would know, because isn't it obvious that, well, yeah, actually, my partner's different than me. I have to speak what it is that I want and need, not assume that they'll know, because people are radically different. And I brought in the beginning, valuing this differentness is the point of the relationship. Like you were attracted to them because they were adventurous when you weren't a risk taker. They were this creative person that thought of all these things that you would have never thought of because you're ordered and structured, right? And whatever it is. And that's what we're attracted to in the other person. But then when we get into the relationship, then we're upset that they're not like us. We're like, well, why don't you think like me? And so it's valuing the individual for the differences in there. There are some tests that people do. So I think the unique abilities test, and there's a bunch of those tests in there that are great. There's a book on love languages. That's really interesting. I think that's helpful. I think all of these are great tools. I think a lot of times they get stuck on their particular way. I think looking at them on the whole is great, and grabbing any of them is great. So the love languages, there's different, just to throw a few things just to spark ideas. So some people, actually my wife and I had this one a lot. I'd be home for the weekend and I'd spend time with the whole family. And like, I would be there, not working, not doing anything else. Like the whole family, like we're doing things all day long. And then I hear at the end of the weekend that like she missed me and didn't get to spend any time. It was like, we were like literally next to each other, like all weekend long. What are you talking about? But it was like, because we were with the kids and it was a family thing. And they wanted like, time with just us, right? And I actually heard this with one of my sons, because one of my sons is a quality time person too. And it was like, I was doing something with him and his brother. And he was like, no, like I want time with just you, and there's people that quality time is one of these. Like it's that is their love language. And if they don't get that, they feel starved, right? Some people, it's words of affirmation, right? It's they need to hear the things that you appreciate them, that you value about them, why you love them. And they need to hear it on a regular basis, not once a year on Valentine's Day in a card, right? They need to hear those things. And so speaking words are what's important to them. Others, it's physical affection, it's closeness, it's touch. I don't need to talk. I don't need to, I just want to sit and be close to you. And if I'm close to you, then I feel loved and connected with you. Some people, it's acts of service, right? Some people, it's gifts. There's different ways. The acts of service is the person that I described. They're like, I love you. That's why I changed your oil and I mowed the lawn and I did all these things. And so, but if it's a words of affirmation person, it's like, well, that's great, but that's not the way I receive love. That's not the thing that fills my bucket. And I think in our car analogy, we got to change the oil. There's maintenance, and then we also got to gas the thing up, right? Like what gasses up your partner? What makes them feel excited and alive in there? Gifts is another. And just to throw this out there, often the way a person receives love is not the way they most like to give love as well. So knowing yourself, like what you want to give and how you receive and what your partner is there. There's also the personality types. There's a website called Understand Myself, I think. That's pretty interesting. And it's, I think it used to be free, but it may be like $5 or something like that now. And it's personality tests that you can take, and you can take it and your partner can take it, and then it'll combine together and show you guys you don't match. There's all sorts of different ways to do this, but understanding that is where I'm bringing this in. Like, how intentional about discovering how your partner needs to be loved, what your partner's good at, what they're not good at, what their strengths are, what their not strengths are, what yours are, and how these mesh. Like, how well do you know each other? How well do you know yourself? How well do you know them? And how well do you know where you mix and match and where you don't? And a lot of the friction comes from these places of mismatch. I'm an introvert, they're an extrovert. I'm a person high on conscientiousness. I'm a person low on the consciousness scale. I'm a person high on openness and risk-taking. I'm a person low on openness and risk-taking, or orderliness or disorderly, orderliness and creativity. I think of a lot of it as like metals and metallurgy. It's like, well, what's the best metal? Like, well, it depends on what you're doing. Like, what one makes one quality makes a metal flexible and not able to be broken, makes it also not be able to hold an edge well. What makes it able to hold an edge and to be sharp makes it brittle and not flexible, right? So there isn't a right and wrong way to be. It's understanding like what metal is your partner made it of, and don't try to make them, well, you're not sharp, or you're too brittle, you break too easy. It's like, that's right, because your partner's flexible, and flexible has its strength as well. And so it's about learning to use your partner's metal correctly and understanding your own and understanding where they don't. If you take a knife with high carbon, that's great, out into the Pacific Northwest, it's going to rust before you ever get to use it. And you're going to say the thing is a piece of junk. It's not a piece of junk. It's not being used in the right context, and you're not valuing it for what it is. So this is about doing a deep dive on yourself and on your partner, where you overlap, where you don't overlap, and learning to value the individual for their authentic selves encourages deeper connections and reduces misunderstandings between each other.